Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today I'm speaking with Thomas Akers, Chief Executive Officer, CEO at Zone 5 Technology. Thomas, thanks for joining today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Well, it's not often. That's why I love this podcast. You just get guys that are out rocking, making stuff happen. So tell us about your background before we get into the company, and how did you find yourself CEO of an awesome startup that's kicking butt?
Yeah, it's a long background. I've been doing the unmanned system stuff for a number of years. Started my first company when I was a sophomore at university back in the late 90s. Grew that, delivered a lot of awesome capabilities, moved on to some other stuff, and then enjoyed defense and aerospace too much, got sucked back in, supported AFRL for a number of years and built those into some unique capabilities that led the way to what we're doing at Zone 5 now in the affordable mass missile space and counter-UAS.
So you started as a sophomore. What did you talk to me about that? Like you're in college and you're like, time to go build something.
Yeah, it's quite the story. So our customer at the time was the Skunk Works out of Palmdale, and we were doing micro UAVs. So literally we could get a full size drawing for a vehicle faxed to us on an 8.5 by 11. And we would scribble on a cost, this is X dollars. And the Skunk Works would ship us back a PO. We'd build it. Things would go silent for a bit. And I'd show back up to the shop a few weeks later with a new fax, with a new design. And that's how we operated for a little bit. And it built from there. We ultimately ended up building systems like the Desert Hawk, which was nominated for the Collier Trophy in 2003. Got to see that come to completion, that there's one hanging in the Imperial War Museum in London, and got to go travel and see that. And that was a great capstone or bookmark on that. And yeah, capstone on that, that adventure, to see something that you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into, then see it get recognized by the partner nation that fielded it, in their museum, in their capital, was an awesome experience.
So you're just in college and you're like, I think I want to make drones. And I mean, how did this come about?
Yeah, I grew up flying model airplanes. I knew the right people at the right time. Definitely a degree of arrogance that, I can do this, but also wanted to stay in Central California, San Luis Obispo, where we're at, when I graduated, and figured there's no better way to do that than to start your own company. So set out and accomplished it.
How did that end up? Did you end up selling it with an exit or?
Yeah, that's also a bit of a story that we did a bit of an exit. Ultimately, that Lockheed ended up buying the company in the form of Chandler May, ran that for a while. I left prior to that acquisition due to it was time to move on and set another course, and had a interim adventure, and then got asked to come back and support AFRL on some fun stuff, and had an amazing few years supporting them on a contract basis. And then those ideas led into moving into designing missiles and kinetic defeat mechanisms for counter UAS, and that's what's built Zone 5.
Awesome. That's very cool. So talking about Zone 5, so you got some of these ideas from my AFRL, and then kind of what was your initial thesis and where'd you go?
Yeah, so we focused at Zone 5 on two things. So, we originally looked at playing in the traditional, not traditional, but very long endurance ISR space. But what we found was, that and the, small UAS market there's a lot of players, and the barrier to entry is pretty low, especially with open source autopilots and the proliferation of very advanced capabilities that those have brought to the market. But we found that true cruise missiles and then kinetic counter UAS was something where you can bring together a lot of engineering capabilities, solve hard problems, and differentiate from the rest of the market. What that means is you compete against much larger organizations. So, our competitors at this point on, say, the Enterprise Test Vehicle program, we compete directly against Anduril, but we beat out all of the primes to win these spots, between the two companies. So we, as a small company of about 200 people, we have a very high performing team that's able to come together, rapidly develop, and meet the demands of the customer, but do it at the level that's superior to what the more traditional companies are able to do.
So cool. So as a startup, talk to me about through that journey. So you got this idea, you got a couple guys, I imagine, they're like, let's go do this. And Did you
Yeah,
capital? Did you just build a model on your own? Like, how did you get going? And then what did that scaling look like just from an entrepreneurial perspective?
yeah. So the both Aeromech, which is the first company in Zone 5, started with myself and a excellent business partner that got things going. Zone 5 was very much, I was gun for hire in my garage. Like, actually I started on the dining room table. We put a little bit of money in ourselves and grew it from there. So it's, now we're a much larger organization, but we're very fortunate that, we're not beholden to any outside investors. We're not on a timetable, and we can be very patient. We can think longer term and be free to grow within, what we can accomplish. It is limiting. We can't go out and put down a major stake on something because we're operating as a profitable company and showing that you can aggressively grow and you can aggressively develop within the proceeds and the revenue that you generate. So it's a much different starting path to here than a traditional investor-led organization. But it's one that extra time and that patience gets you to a spot where you have a lot more control of your destiny and where you're going to go in the long run.
Yeah, so you've been around for 11 years, is that right? Or
2011, so coming up on 14 years.
14 years. Yeah, because defense tech wasn't super exciting for a startup back then either. I mean, there was probably not much capital available, even if you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, at Aeromech, the first company, we did, private equity and VC, and that was a very different scenario. The markets really hadn't come around to defense tech as something that was worth investing in. Today is obviously very different. But that's definitely a very valid way of getting to the end state. But what we've accomplished at Zone 5, is the opposite. It just requires dedication and patience. You have to be able to provide something that customers value right off the bat, not something that you're going to invest in, for multiple years before you have a product.
And what is that key? I mean, how do you make things? You're starting off your small team generally because you're not at scale, your costs are high. How do you get costs down? How do you drive that innovation, but to turn a profit early on?
So you really have to be willing to dig in and build the capability yourself. You can't go out and hire a team to do small tasks. So you have to build a team where the mantra of everybody wears many hats is at its core. So you must have engineering staff that are expert in multiple disciplines. They're also running finance. You're not building. You can't afford to build a large staff initially. You need to be very aggressive at constraining or maximizing what you get out of the investments that you make, and then leverage those over and over and over again into a larger organization. So it's about the incremental milestones. Your first contract award, your first SBIR phase 1 to a phase 2 to a phase 3 to now very large OTAs and a very different kind of outlook on the world. But it's all building blocks that one after the other that get you here. There's no step change of the world changes in your favor overnight. It's methodical. It's progressive as it happens.
Yeah. So do you find, I mean, you're at a point now, I mean, early on, correct if I'm wrong, but there didn't seem to be a lot of innovation in the space. I mean, there were people messing around with it, but it seemed pretty stagnant. And now with the, machine learning turning into AI and large language models, the ability to just really go fast, are you seeing that pace of innovation accelerating? And do you think you will need to go outside capital so that you can, be able to make those investments to, scale at that growth that you need? Or are you in a spot that you think, nope, you've now got enough capital coming in that you're able to weather this on your own?
Right. I think the big change that's happened, and the war in Ukraine highlights that. And in some cases, I think a lot of people saw this coming, is that defense tech has moved from iterating at the rate of traditional aerospace or the defense primes and the government acquisition cycle, these 10-year long kind of iteration cycles, to now you're into days and minutes in Ukraine. And that's driving a very different technology base, a very different iteration, design philosophy, et cetera, that's rapidly accelerating. I think we're very fortunate that we've because we've been doing this for a while, we were able to be positioned correctly to win contracts that were key to our growth at the right time. And so now, as this iteration process is happening, we have our market position to be able to continue what we're doing and scale. But we do look out over, some of the areas like the AI or machine learning, for example, and network collaborative autonomy. And we view the market a bit different. What we're after is, we recognize that those capabilities on a platform are also rapidly evolving. And our job to differentiate and best serve the customer is to provide the standard interfaces that allow other companies are making those investments to accelerate and then come deploy on our system, versus trying to vertically integrate the entire stack of technologies. We choose the system, the portions that give you the kinematic performance of the weapon, the open architecture, the overall manufacturing cost, and then allow third parties to plug into our system and show their capabilities.
Awesome. So you have, talking about now Zone 5. So what are your primary, say, initiatives or efforts, platforms, if you have them, and where you're going with them would be great.
So Zone 5, we focus on two business areas of affordable mass missiles or air-launched effects and kinetic counter-UAS. We don't play outside of that space in any significant capacity. We find great market traction there, and it's a good fit for our overall engineering and production capabilities. On the air-launched effect space, we're best known for our positions on the Defense Innovation Unit and Air Force's Enterprise Test Vehicle program, where we're one of the primes on that, and on the ERAM program, which Extended Range Attack Munition, which is another Air Force program, and we've been awarded LRIP production contract for that. And so we have moving from the demonstration, the ability to rapidly develop a new missile in a very tight time frame, less than a year, to now moving that into large scale production. We're well beyond how do we make onesie, twosies to how are we making thousands to tens of thousands of these products as we move forward. On the counter-UAS side, we support several different programs. Notably is the Paladin system, which is deployed at multiple locations around the world. And this is a low collateral defeat system. So it takes the cost per engagement against a Group 1 or Group 2 UAS and looks to minimize that, down to the cost of a smart shotgun shell versus a high-end interceptor or an advanced, expensive jamming system. And that ultimately realized itself in a fully autonomous multi-rotor that has all the capabilities to fly out, intercept, station keep, and shoot down adversary threats. So it's a pretty amazing capability.
Okay, let's take each one of those separately. So on the affordable mass, is it a rocket, a missile? What is it? How does it deploy? Where do you see customers? What's the use case for it? Just to bring that to light.
Yeah, so affordable mass missiles are generally air-breathing, so turbojet-powered cruise missiles. So these are, while they share a lot of commonality in the cost profile of one-way attack drones, we're doing this at 0.7 Mach at 25,000 feet, the attributes that when you think of a traditional cruise missile. So we're bringing that very kinematic style or kinematic capability down to a much lower price point by doing this. That allows depth of magazine. I can get more weapons to a target area for a much lower overall cost per engagement or cost per effect. That can be used in a maritime environment or a land-based environment, but the intent is you're not sacrificing a lot of capability. You're just, bringing the price point down by fundamentally creating an affordable system from the beginning. So we see both, launching off of fighters and then cargo launch capabilities, similar to what's done with Rapid Dragon, where you're launching these missiles out of, large mobility aircraft.
And it's just fascinating to me. So is it because you don't have the how are you able to make these so much cheaper than someone that's building? I mean, we've had cruise missiles for a long time, right? I mean, How are you able to do this, the same capability or, in the same neighborhood for so much cheaper?
A lot comes down to stepping away from you're going to build the cheaper version using the same supply chains that the more expensive or exquisite systems are built on. If you don't change the fundamental cost drivers or assumptions in the system, you'll never really change the price point. You'll just do incremental changes. I can cut the cost 25%, but we're talking an order of magnitude reduction, in cost in terms of objectives. And that gets to, you must be willing to both design both the weapon and the supply chain and the production process to meet your objectives. So rather than being a very performance-focused requirement set, we have a production-focused requirement set. For us, it's all about how do you make the weapon at rate? And rate is defined as, how fast can you deliver a weapon in production? And there is a time target. And then you must develop all of the production processes and the weapon design that allows you to achieve that production rate. That drives out complexity, that drives in simplicity. It constrains the sort of resources that you can bring to bear. And all of that results in a very lean weapon and production environment that drives the cost down. It is not a silver bullet. This is a holistic day one to the final day of the program is focused on, how are we changing the assumptions on cost and driving it down.
So how did you do that? I mean, how did you design, you said design your own supply chain, if you will? Are you going overseas? Like, how are you getting that supply chain? Are you going to just people that have never developed this before and working with them? Or are you building it? You're not building it in-house, doesn't sound like, your supply chain.
No, we build the majority of the weapon in-house. There's clearly things that we buy, but we have like-minded partners. So we are, partnered with some great companies developing the kinetic effect, because that must also be designed to the same, cost objectives. If you just go to the existing supply chains for the bulk of the bill of materials for the weapon, you can't change the cost. So we go to that level of kinetic effect. We go to the level on composite structures. We do all of our own machining, and everything is done very tightly coupled. Engineering and production are tightly linked. In our facility, a problem on the shop floor can have the engineers next to the problem, in a minute. It's that tightly coupled. And by doing that, you really get to see firsthand what the issues are that the technicians are fighting on the production line, what's driving cost, and then use that as a feedback mechanism to the engineering to improve the design to address that. In a traditional supply chain where you're outsourcing so much of the content, you lose that tightly coupled nature that allows you to iteratively design the cost out of the weapon.
So in many respects, at least on the production side, you are vertically stacked and integrated so that you're not doing all the technology, but for the platform, you're owning from, soup to nuts.
Correct. We write all the software. We develop the flight control avionics. We do all the aerodynamics. We do all the machining. We have a great partner for the composite aerostructures, and we ultimately assemble everything and ship out all up rounds, at the end of the process.
How hard was it to work with the government to, it's a slow beast to change, to get to adopt your manufacturing process? How do they know it's going to work? Is that different because it's an attritable system that maybe those tolerances aren't as high, or you just worked through the process and got, them to believe, the quality of your product?
I think in all cases, we are incredibly fortunate to have a customer set that has the same mission. They're tasked with proving that you can design and build rapidly at these price points. So it is not Zone 5 out on an island trying to do this. We have a very tight coupled relationship with our customer. We support them. It is open communication. We share our issues, and we depend on their ability to work through and support us in developing the solutions. You did not start day one with these capabilities, but in a more commercial type strategy, we rapidly spiraled to this. So, we went from a contract award to first flight in 7 months. On the case of the ERAM effort, it was, first flight in 4 months. And these aren't flying around the pattern. This is dropping a weapon at 25,000 feet, having it fly, waypoint navigation, and strike a target. That's first flight. So the bar is still very high. We must recognize we're delivering weapon systems, but there's an acknowledgement that there's some warts. These are prototypes, and now we've been refining them, and now the process is eking out the consistency in the production process, finding the last bit of time, maturing the software to a final release state. And that's been done iteratively, but over a very, very fast, time frame. We're talking months, not years, to do this.
Have you seen, are there competitors out there doing, I mean, same thing? Is this, or have you uniquely already built that side of the house that allows you to do this, where other people like, shit, we need to pivot over there to build our own supply chain, if you will?
It's hard to speak to others that are working in the space. I know there are everyone has a different thesis, in terms of what is the right way to develop an affordable system that you can change. Our viewpoint is we have built the engineering expertise, the machining capabilities, et cetera. We have the design and realization engine in-house to put it to work and realize these things. We don't depend on, significant contribution from others. We're not out, shipping a PO and getting an assembled weapon. And because we had that engine in place prior to start, that allowed us to get a bit of a leg up and move forward. And we've doubled down on that as we've grown. So, we still have a very high proportion of engineers on staff, and they are all busy, iterating, improving, and looking at both, the current weapons and what the next versions are going to be.
For just my edification, how big is this weapon?
Yeah, it's about a 500-pound class weapon.
Okay.
They can fly, about 500 nautical miles is kind of the open literature on it.
And it's the platform, the warhead, the engine, and then anything else for contested environments, the EW suites, or comms, that's all strap on by the customer.
Or integrated by us, right? So we have our own, we do the integration of the navigation system for a contested environment. We're developing, various payloads for it, various effects. There will be customer specific attributes that could be added in the future. That's why we have a modular system, so that you can update these things over time, both at a hardware and software layer, versus I buy a system, I store it for 10 years. During that 10 years, the threat has rapidly evolved, and now my 10-year-old inventory is aging out and irrelevant, right? We want these to be, okay, you buy, and then you can be constantly updating them as required, so that you're not having to rebuy the weapon to respond to the changing threat. You can adapt, what you've already purchased, and be very responsive to the say that the adversary is getting. And I'd say, recent events show that the adaptation of the threat and its ability to spiral is rapidly shifting and going much faster. And our weapon development cycle must match that to continue to be relevant.
All right, let's transition now to your counter-UAS platform. Talk to me about, you gave it just a high level, but break down a little bit more and how you got on this journey.
Yeah. So Paladin is, you take a very complex mission, which is I get a threat, a group 1, group 2, an unknown radar detection of a UAS out at 5-10 kilometers. How do you engage that beyond visual sight? You can't ask a ground force or a security forces to point a jammer at it. They can't see it. You don't know what it is, so you can't just lob an unguided rocket at it. You've got to be able to fly out there, merge with it, station keep, positively ID it, and then if it is ID to be a threat, then engage it and shoot it down. And Paladin is a large multi-rotor, a Group 2 class vehicle.
Can you talk real quick, Group 1, 2 difference for those?
Sure. Group 1s are the smaller FPV, DJI Phantom class, small drones. Group 2s are about the 55-pound class, large multi-rotor, smaller fixed wings, and then you have larger Group 3 up to Group 4 or 5, like a Predator, Reaper class system. So we focus definitely on the smaller side, but that's where you can see from Ukraine where the bulk of the threat is at. The large numbers of drones that are being built. This is a system to to help defend large installations against this. This is not a man-portable system. This is protection for large geographic areas like an air base or an embassy or another type of facility. So a Paladin is able to take an off-board radar feed, and the operator can click on a red dot on the screen, and that Paladin will take off, fly out, merge with that, transition to its onboard sensors, slew the gun at the target, image it for you, and if it's a threat, it will close the entire firing solution on board and shoot it down. And that's for maneuvering targets, that's for stationary targets, fixed wing, FPV, multi-rotor. We engage all threats in that class, and it's quite effective. But the big differentiator is the cost per engagement is very low. So it's the cost of the shotgun shell that is used to shoot down. And then we can carry a fairly deep magazine. So we are fairly unique in the space that we have an ability to engage multiple targets on one flight, with one interceptor. And so if you have 3 threats coming in, one Paladin can go shoot down all of those threats on one flight.
And what is the weapon delivery method? Is it literally a shotgun?
It starts as a shotgun. By the time we're done with it, it's quite advanced. So it is stabilized. It has ATR on it, an imaging system, et cetera, that's fused with an onboard radar, that onboard, so you get a 3D firing solution, and all of that is run by Zone 5, and we develop all that software to ultimately be able to steer the drone, the Paladin, and get the weapon, into the right firing solution to hit the shot.
All right. Well, that does sound pretty damn cool. So like, let's say Langley Air Force Base is getting invaded by these things. They're all over the place. Would you have a system of 5 of them? Like what would from a ConOps perspective, what would that look like from, deployment and execution?
Yeah, they're deployed in, sets of say 3 to 5, right? They have an enclosure that they sit in so they can stand ready. They're protected from heat and snow, rain. When you need them, the enclosure's open, the Paladins fly out and they do their engagement and then return. So depending on the size of the installation, yeah, you may want 2 or 3 systems, but they can all be controlled from a central location. They're integrated with the base defense, radars, command and control network, et cetera. And we've, the goal is it's literally simplified down to someone clicks a red dot on a screen and that red dot is eliminated. That's the end state that we're after.
So there's no, I'm guessing there is some sort of communication to verify it's a threat, right?
Correct. And that's part of what makes the Paladin unique, is because we can station keep quite accurately, and then we can image, we can show the operator, in that chain of command, what's actually happening. And is it a casual UAS being run by a hobbyist that just let it fly through, don't escalate, or something strapped to it, and this is actually a positive threat? We provide that feedback to allow that decision to happen and to employ force and defeat the UAS.
So cool. Well, which one's your baby? Which one do you like more? The affordable mass or the Paladin?
Now you're asking, people to a parent to tell which of their children they love the most.
But there always is one. At least
there always is one.
Life.
I would say I think the Paladin program has been that started as like a glimmer, a twinkle in someone's eye of, I think we can do this. And that team has done it in an amazing way. It is anticlimactic almost when a Paladin operates. It's loud when it leaves, but then all you hear after a couple minutes is a muffled, shot and a down threat, and then the Paladin returns. The engineer in me, and especially I'm an aerospace engineer, missiles are freaking cool. And when you're designing stuff where Mach number is the metric, yeah, that's I love that as well. But they're all part of Zone 5. They're all done by the excellent team that we have here. And so, I'm thankful and very fortunate to have the opportunity to work with people and develop those systems.
That's great. If we were just for scoping, what would a normal cruise missile cost? What would the cost of yours cost? And the same thing with the Paladin, if you look at just the cost, because there's probably not a normal out there, but.
Yeah, so a large traditional cruise missile, now you're in the $1.5 million plus or minus is a good target. An affordable mass missile, you're trying to get into the $200,000 price point. Wow. So you're significantly cheaper, but you can't just fly around at 100 knots, and expect to survive the environment. You are operating in a contested environment. You're presenting a high threat to our adversary, and they're going to shoot back. So you've got to have the performance and the capabilities to bring the heat.
How about on the Paladin system?
Yeah, Paladins, they're expensive, I think, is the end game. But by doing that, you have a one-time cost, for a system. And what you're really after is the cost per engagement. What does it cost to shoot down that threat? Right. And we're trying to get that. It's $50. It's very low cost, to do that engagement, and then you have a residual system that you're able to use for other missions as well, because you can strap mortars, you can strap loudspeakers, searchlights, other things onto a Paladin, and it can do other missions, for the base that it's defending.
That's pretty cool. So you've been building defense tech now for a long time. What's changed most dramatically, like in how threats have evolved, and then how you've seen the defense industry, pivot with that?
I think when I started, there were no open source autopilots, for example. The multi-rotors did not exist. I remember the first multi-rotor I saw was like a toy from Japan that, you could barely fly. And then DJI happens and it proliferates. And now you have access to technology that was not available 20, 30 years ago. And now that technology is getting integrated quite rapidly into very high performing systems at a very low price point. What that is doing is that is making the already difficult to manage cost imbalance of how much does it cost for us to defeat our adversary, or how much does it cost for our adversary to defeat us. And it's spiraling that away from the normal defense solutions that we see. And so you're seeing a shift from legacy kind of approaches to these new, hey, we're going to try and build things over open source. We're going to, more importantly, develop iteratively and very, very fast, versus the methodical waterfall. We're going to figure everything out before we do anything. This is much more, try it, break it, fix it, deploy it, learn, that kind of approach. It's quite refreshing to see that. It is also not, I think, well-defined in how is this going to work long-term. So that there's definitely some uncertainty in terms of, once things shake out, what's the long-term best of breed approach going to be?
Do you find what's the risk tolerance of the customer as well as yourself on, I would say, supply chain security, but more in the like open software realm, in the software realm? If you're using software, it's open, but these are combat assets.
That's a good question that I hope our competitors can answer for you, because that's not the approach that we take. I think we see, we write our own software. It is not open source.
Okay, so when you mentioned open source, that's just changing the industry, but not for you. You're right.
Right. It's opening up doors and perceptions to people. But what we're after is, well, no, you can iterate on that same pace, but you can iterate on a software basis that has the right government data rights to it, so that others can collaborate it. It's built to government-owned standards, so that you know how to add capability to it in the future. It's a different approach, but it's still done at that same rate as the more traditional open source. But there's definitely a clear decision needs to be made from a government standpoint in the long run of, will open source systems, how will they be managed, and what is the security that you're going to layer onto them to maintain them? I think the answer is a bit murky right now.
How much are you into the policy side? So, I mean, I've talked to other companies that do some things that are similar, or do you even worry about that? You're just meeting a customer need with like Paladin. So counter-UAS, obviously, like, why isn't that, how can we defend our bases better? But there's policy issues with it. What's your perspective on that? Is that a bigger risk to actually getting these implemented, or is it the capability set?
I think you have to have the initial customers that understand how to maneuver through today's policy constraints. Paladin definitely has, it must operate in a certain way. And there are missions we can do and bases we could defend, and there's areas that we can't go, because of the effect. In the case of of cruise missiles, I think the big one is the understanding of the FMS, the export side of things. As technology evolves, how fast can that side keep up with the changes so that the U.S. industry base is not disadvantaged, by the policy side of the house when it comes to international competitions. We are not important enough to significantly swing that bell one way or the other, or that rope. But we do recognize there's issues. And honestly, the best thing we can do to influence those is to work with our customers and show success of what we're doing, why it's important, and continue to build that support to make it into a big thing that is important.
Yeah, be responsive to their concerns.
100%.
Yeah.
If first you must perform. If you're not performing for your customer, you can have a great story and all of the best bells and whistles, but that's not going to last very long. You have to build a track record of sustained performance. You say what you can do and you prove that you can do it. That generally, in the long run, solves most problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So what have you seen bubbling to the top as the most urgent requests from kind of the military customers in the drone technology space?
For our side on the counter-UAS, it's the threats are rapidly evolving. So that the capabilities of a Shaheed, for example, are, they're not static and the quantities are going up. So, how do you close the gap between, the point defense systems and the long range kill chain that we have that are deployed for that kind of adversary? There's a gap that must be rapidly fielded because we can't launch, multi-million-dollar missiles, $50,000 drones. That's not sustainable. So that you have
we have.
It's not sustainable, right? The adversary plays more cards than just, kinematic effects on you. They are playing an economic card, and we're seeing the impact of that. And so we see a lot of need to rapidly field stopgap measures or legitimate long-term capabilities in that space. On the air-launched effect side, it's getting the prices down, getting the volumes up, and volume being, the number you can get in the fight at a time, and having a supply chain that can scale to be responsive to a time of conflict, but then also, come back down to peacetime levels as well. To do that, you can't have hard or high capital cost kind of production processes. It must be able to scale quickly. And that gets back to, I think, one of Zone 5's advantages is because we don't have any outside investment, our whole production process is built on what we can cash flow and invest in as a small company. Well, that means there's a lot of other companies like Zone 5 out there that can do the same thing, and we, in terms of being able to produce the kind of weapon that we're designing, well, that gives us a lot of supply chain that we could go to scale versus, large, exquisite production sites where you only have a couple of them, and now you're competing for that capacity. We very much want to show that there is a large existing industrial base in the United States. We have thousands of machine shops. We have electronics assembly houses. We have all the capabilities to build things at scale. What we don't have is weapon systems designed to utilize those. We have weapon systems designed to work inside the construct of a large prime. And we're trying to show that that's not the right way. Leverage the industrial base that we already have so that you don't have to wait for that future capability in terms of production. We can do this today if you start with the right objective in terms of your production processes.
What's the biggest tech hurdle you've run into in either one of these systems?
For a Paladin, we generally take for granted now that it can fly out and shoot down a drone. But the amount of software and learning that has gone into the sensor fusion, all of the state estimation, the technology that enables that to happen, that was a tremendous hurdle. There was definitely times of, hey, are we going to get there or not? But then, first shot, first kill, that was a great day for the customer. And since then, we've had problems, but we work together and we get through them. Similar on the missiles, we have had issues that we are no different than any other organization. We have our missteps. We acknowledge them, we learn from them and we move on. That has to be a core tenet of any good organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And your ability to pivot and change fast, which you guys are, smaller and agile, which is pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Let's go kind of pivot just a little bit. So how has it been working in the acquisition process, with DoD, in your customer set? You mentioned, different SIVers and different contract awards, the compliance requirements required. How has it been? Like, if you were just to summarize, this has been not too bad and this sucked.
It's definitely the traditional way of SIBR, IDIQ, the cost type contracts. It's not that it sucked. It's there's, you just got to hunker down and do it. At the end of the day, your ability to execute on the contract type that is tied to the money that you're chasing is no different than your ability to execute on the technical part of a program. So just accept it and get after it. I think that's, people put it off, but it's not an insurmountable task. You just got to learn to do it. We do find, though, that with the newer programs, the OTA, OTP process is definitely, a much more responsive contract type that allows us to work collaboratively with the customer, quickly evolve and quickly respond, to changing scenarios. So we're quite thankful that contract type exists and look to leverage that a lot going forward.
Yeah, so you're seeing the changes and that are talking with the acquisition system. They're starting to take hold and help companies and really help our customer, the government, do great things.
Agreed. There are a lot of very dedicated contracting officers and public servants that are trying to achieve the same thing. They are working very hard to create a more responsive acquisition process. I think we are an example of what can be accomplished when all those things come together. Yeah. Now, how do we get more of it to come together in other programs?
So, are you close to, in your journey to becoming a program of record, or how does that? Where are you seeing yourself fit, kind of in that, world?
Yeah. Several of our programs are very much on that path to program of record over the next, 24 or 12 to 18 months is about the right time frame. So it's in the near term. We are not there yet. Performance is still the key thing. We got to keep showing that we can do it every day. We are no different than any other organization, and we continue to build the trust of our customers and support them.
Fantastic. So next 3 to 5 years, what are we looking at with Zone 5? What's it going to look like?
Zone 5, we transition from affordable mass, in particular, from an idea to a proven reality. The objective is not to show we can build 10 of an affordable mass concept. The objective is we have rapidly built, thousands to tens of thousands of these weapons, and they are deployed in the inventory and ready for use. We must see this to conclusion, concept through to, deployment to be successful. We have come so far, and proven so much that anything less than full on, deployment, it's a letdown. Is it a failure? Yeah, but it's definitely a letdown, and we owe it to ourselves and to our customers to give everything we have to make that happen. On the counter-UAS side, there's a variety of things that we're working on that I think will bring a lot of affordable mass attributes, into the counter-UAS space and get us back to the right economic parity, with the threat. We are not, as a company, we are not trying to have a solution for every mission scenario that's out there, but we do see a few unique scenarios where we can differentiate, and you'll see those systems start to be deployed soon.
That's so good. Well, unfortunately, Thomas, I think we're running out of time here, but if folks want to follow this, because I think your journey is amazing and what you're doing is, so good. How's the best way? Where do you publish most of your journey? And
yeah, we keep a bit of a website at zone5tech.com, and you can find us on LinkedIn at Zone 5 Technologies.
All right. Well, this has been amazing. Super fun. I look forward when I get up to California. Let's get together and get a beer or the next conference. But I really appreciate it. I've learned a ton, and this has been great. So thank you very much.
All right. I appreciate the opportunity. It's been great, man.